So welcome and thank you, and let's do a couple of intros. Terry, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I'm Terry LeBlanc, board member here at Spinal Cord Injury BC, among other things, and yeah, injured 1978, C45. Dave.
I'm Dave Symington. I was injured in 1975, C5-6 quadriplegia complete, and I've been involved in post-secondary education for the most part. But yeah, the issues of sexuality have been an ongoing theme underlying most of my life and most of our lives. So this issue that we're addressing today has to do with further development of sexual health resources, we'll say for now.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
My name's Marie Carlson. My title is Sexual Health Clinician. I work at GF Strong Rehab Center, part of Vancouver Coastal Health, and I'm part of a group of rehabilitation nurses and physicians working in sexuality and urology as a team in sexual health rehab. And we help people learn about what's happened to their bodies and their lives around sexuality, intimacy, and relationships. So I'm here consulting with Dave and Terry and the Ease team, and looking forward to the next hour or so.
So thank you. So I'm just going to say what we're going to do during this session, and it's basically what is on our website. And the idea of today is to explore and have a frank discussion about the challenges many people with disabilities face when it comes to sexual expression. And that's what you three will be facilitating today, basically. But a little bit more specifically also, we're hoping to get a little bit more history about ease and the topic itself. And Marie, that's where some of your expertise will come in. And ease from Dave and Terry, talking about how this whole idea started, you know, who were the people involved and what happened, were there some barriers, you know, that something happened along the way. And what we will focus during some of our next session is moving from where we're at now to the future. You know, what does the future hold? But for today, it'd be great if we could just focus on some of that history of the sexual health topic, history of ease, and your own personal history involvement with all of this.
Yeah, and I think maybe I could start off just by sort of talking a bit about my own personal experiences and then how the idea for EASE came about, or at least a project like EASE. I think, like I said, I've been injured since 1975. I was 19 at the time. I think I consider myself fortunate that I'd had an active sex life, at least for a couple of years prior to injury. And so I had some basic skills and experience, although I realize now as I get older it was pretty physically oriented and wasn't a lot to do with emotion and intimacy.
Here's the door again. I had to knock on
Sorry,
the window.
just have somebody enter the room.
Sorry, Barbara.
Could you hear it here? No.
So I think over time, as you know, I continue to get involved in relationships, and again, fortunately, was involved with very understanding and experienced people that were willing to work with me on exploring other means of experiencing my sexuality and finding a degree of satisfaction, and sort of getting over the hurdle of my anger and bitterness about losing my the physical aspects of, you know, in terms of feeling my genitalia and being able to experience ejaculation and have sensation and all that, which took a number of years to kind of get through, and it still comes up every once in a while. Excuse the pun. But so
There's got to be some humor.
there's got to be some, yeah. You should come to our meetings. So I think what happened was, you know, as I got older and became maybe a little more sensitive to other people's situations and or working at developing programs that would help other people, it actually came out of a conversation that I had with Sam Sullivan, because we had been involved in developing a few other societies like Adapted Music and Sailing and Tetra and other groups you're probably familiar with. But there was a story about I think it was a 14-year-old boy that was injured playing hockey and became a complete high-level quadriplegic. And we were just having this conversation, realizing, well, what happens to people like that may not have any dating experience or any intimacy experience or had a partner? Where can they go to get that experience if they may be facing a whole number of different obstacles from their own experience, their own lack of knowledge and understanding, barriers in the community, attitudes, lack of access to potential partners, and all that. And we got to realize that there really isn't a program or a way to easily facilitate that. And not that that's all we're talking about, but it is one aspect that we're talking about. How do people gain experience and ways to facilitate them through this transition to find a satisfactory means of expressing their sexuality? So in approximately 10 years ago, we decided to do some research and look at what was available on a global basis and locally. And I actually went out and did some experiential research, actually visited some escort agencies, some massage parlors, some tantric massage people, and a few other things. This is the kind of thing I'd never done before. I thought about it, but I never really had to do it. But to see what it was like, what would happen if I go into an escort agency or a massage parlor? Would they accept me? What kind of services could I expect to have? Would they be sensitive to my needs? Would I feel comfortable? Would I feel satisfied? And there was a wide range of experiences. Some actually quite frightening. Some very positive. But we did this really to find out. And I'm going in with the background of experience and having had relationships. And in one case, I sat in my van for an hour just trying to get up the courage to go into one of these places.
Was that because of you were scared or just?
Well, I had no idea how I think I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of not being satisfied. I was afraid of not being able to negotiate what I wanted. I was really, you think you're experienced and worldly, but I realized I was very naive and inexperienced in that world. And so, it raised the level of awareness about, what's it like for people that may have no experience or have different needs in their sexuality. Maybe I was already been through a transition. I already kind of knew what I was looking for. If I wanted someone to help facilitate that for me, somebody that may not have any understanding of disability or the kinds of limitations I may face, it's a very difficult task to achieve in 1 hour. and it's costly too, and not everybody can afford these kind of services. And again, I don't mean to say that's all we're talking about, but it goes from that kind of how do you go out and find, have an experience and find someone to help you through these transitions, or for occasional just intimacy that you may need if you're not in a relationship, to having these opportunities to talk to other peers, to share information, to work at sort of normalizing sexuality for people with disabilities. So I wrote up a report, not to go on at great length about this, but basically it kind of after that we invited Mitch Tepper from the east coast of the States. He came and we had a bit of a workshop with some people.
When was that?
That was, I think it was 2004, at the Granville Island Hotel. And then for some reason, I don't remember exact details, it kind of fell off the table. And I think there was an expectation from my part that maybe this would just happen on its own. And I was busy working at UBC and involved in a number of other things, so it kind of just got forgotten. And then it's probably at this point reasonable to go over to Terry, because the ball got picked up really thanks to Terry in a conversation that he had.
Yeah, I guess the way that conversation happened, I go for acupuncture at the Wellness Center on Commercial Drive, part of the Compassion Club, and one of the counselors there asked to speak to me after my injury, or after my therapy, and she wanted to talk about sex. And more specifically, one of her clients had a child coming of age, and They had no idea how their child was going to experience that first connection. And so that reminded me of Dave's paper that I had read some year before. So I introduced Dave and the counselor, Leanne, and we just started bringing people on board as we needed them. Leanne hooked us up with Hillary Brown, who was instrumental in developing the Compassion Club, and she brought on Riel, and we got, I guess, the mission vision statement all together, and every time we needed somebody special, they just seemed to appear. Marie was one, and
Well, I think part of that initial research too did involve sexual health services. I think partly we still want to know, and I wanted to know at the time, I mean, how much of an issue is this for people and the current service providers like Marie, you know, that because sometimes you come out of workshops and they get a lot of great information from sexual health services, a lot of good counseling and guidance. But there is people may ask us, well, that's wonderful, where do I get the experience? So we're sort of trying to at least have those discussions and potentially provide a service that is safe and meaningful and you know, facilitative and all those ways we're talking about. So, and you know, we understand there's legal issues that are maybe in the way of creating some of these services, but we have Pivot Legal Society as another group that's supporting us, and you know, SCIBC and the Disability Foundation. There's no shortage of people that understand it's an important issue in people's lives. So we're just trying to channel that energy into something that's really positive. I don't know if Marie, you might want to talk about what you do and how we consult with each other. Is that fair?
Sure.
All right.
So like I said, we help people understand the physical and the emotional changes that they might be going through following injury or chronic illness. But we see individuals, we see couples, we see family members of people with disability to help them understand what the future might hold and how to work through it. And we look at sexuality in a broad spectrum of anything from the physical act of being sexual, we term sexual activity, to just being able to communicate, being able to go and be the person you want to be when you leave the house in the morning. It's not just for people who are being sexually active. It's how the core of somebody. I think it was Corey Silverberg who said sex is what we do and sexuality is who we are. That essence inside everything. And we see in rehab that when somebody has a sense of themselves in that way, whether it be their gendered self or their sexual self, that everything in rehab is more possible, that looking forward and hope, similar but not the same as vocational and family relationships. But Dave was saying, you know, what kind of are people asking about this? And in the midst of helping people understand their bodies in a one-to-one session, over the years, lots of people have said, you know, people help us with physio to learn how to move about, to get out there and be active. I have somebody to help me learn how to feed myself, wash myself, dress myself, or talk to someone else about doing that for me. But there isn't anywhere where I can actually get hands-on experience on what sex is going to mean. We do talk therapy, talk education. We do medical treatments for people like fertility, guys with spinal cord injury, like who have ejaculatory issues. So we do some hands-on work, but it's not around a sexual experience. And people have asked that, like, where do I get that? So over the years, we've done our own research on what's happening in the world, and Dave brought up the word surrogacy, I believe. Maybe you didn't.
I think I may have. Yeah.
And there's different definitions of it, but the places that have surrogacy in the world now, the most probably famous one in a rehab center is in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and it was started in a rehab center for veterans, like military veterans who had come back from war with different injuries and were helped and supported on the emotional and the hands-on physical aspect of being sexual. And that same service has grown into a private clinic. That's quite an extensive clinic that's been running for about 20 years. But it's unusual in the world, and there's many layers on what people understand as that kind of help, what people think about it, whether, is definitely from my experience working with clients, it's not for everyone. It's a select group of people who say this is what I would need to move on. Not that anyone's promoting one way or another for any client, but we got to ask the question. For both things. One, how to learn how to be sexual when I'm scared to and I feel too afraid to go be with a partner. And then we also get questions of how do I access services, like sex work services. It's not something that we can connect people with, but we can talk to them about general ideas about being sexual with anyone, whether it be a partner, a friend, a sex worker, just as a general overview as far as what the logistics are, communication, physicality, anything like that.
Where are you from? And
I'm from GF Strong.
okay.
And Barbara, I know heard you introduced. You came in after we've already introduced ourselves.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I was sitting out there for quite a while.
My background's in nursing, and I work in the sexual health rehab service at GF
okay.
Strong. So I'm one of the team there that sees people, inpatients or outpatients.
Right. So you're saying you can talk to them, but you have nowhere to refer them if they want to. They don't have a partner already.
Well, this is definitely another question. Are we a dating service?
No, I don't mean that.
Yeah.
Just,
Well, as far as the legalities go, not just because we're in healthcare, but the legalities are as we understand them, or you can't the word like it's not, the only word is not solicit, but you can't connect somebody.
right.
Procure, like somebody needs to find whatever kind of sexual experience they are looking for themselves
On their own.
in the public domain, and then we can help them with understanding what that interaction would be for themselves to help them feel safe and knowledgeable and comfortable
Right.
in their own life.
But in Israel, it's different.
In Israel, in this one center, and in other parts of the world, like there's the Scarlet Road that Fernando spoke about in a one county or state in New South Wales in Australia.
Yeah.
Sex work is decriminalized, so there's
okay.
there's another that opens up some doors for access for some people.
Dave, maybe you could explain what the acronym means.
What EASE means?
Yeah.
Equitable and Accessible Sexual Expression. Which is a bit of a brainstorming session that we came up with that one, but we kind of like the word ease too, that things should be easier, in a way we've got that side of it when it comes to these sorts of issues. And but yeah, it's interesting, Barb, the issue of, I think the peer side of it, and we've certainly talked to Fernando and SCI about that we see this as an important aspect to the peer program, and that it's available for as a topic for conversation, and that we can share information, experiences that we've had, and maybe how we've overcome some of these barriers in our own lives, and or how we can help each other access other resources.
Would you say, Dave, that we started talking about the sex work aspect, but it actually began in people's requests for how do I get more touch in my life, how do I get more intimacy?
I think, and we have kind of, as a group, talk about it more as intimacy, because there's such a broad spectrum of activities that can fall under that. When you talk about sexuality, people may have more specific, or sex in of itself, more specific ideas about what that may mean. It could mean intercourse, it could mean oral sex, it could mean cuddling.
Yeah.
There's a whole, it's like, what's really important? What is it that you, and so we don't want to sort of limit the range of activities that may be included under the kinds of things that we're talking about. Because I know for me, when I was first injured, intercourse was incredibly important. Even though I couldn't feel my genitals. I just felt like there was some aspect psychologically that I needed to know I was capable of having intercourse, and see myself having intercourse. But on another level with that, it was incredibly unsatisfying that I couldn't let go of this. You know, it took a while to. I mean, and now it's like, I mean, I could almost say I don't care less about intercourse.
Well, as you get older, it's not quite the same.
Well, it's more if it's important to somebody else that it's not that I don't or wouldn't engage in it. It's just not, you know, like it used to be like, well, that has to happen in order for this to be a legitimate sexual experience. You know, now I feel good about myself. Well, now it's more about intimacy and connecting with somebody and understanding each other and working with each other on our own pleasure and what works for us. So that spectrum. Sorry, did you have
Just finish.
So I think as resources become available, and part of the reason we're working with some agencies that do provide. One provides more intimacy coaching, a group that we've been consulting with, and other escort agencies that we think, I mean, first of all, we know these services are being accessed by a broad range of people, including people with disabilities. And I know from people that I've talked to that it's not all been negative, but people have had some incredibly negative and hurtful experiences because they're going places that they can't, in some circumstances, can't possibly satisfy what they're seeking because people don't have any understanding of disability, maybe are afraid of working with people with disabilities because they don't know. They're going in with an element of fear as well. And it can be quite disastrous. So, I mean, as much as possible, we'd like to make sure that if we were telling somebody, not setting something up necessarily, but just saying we know of this resource, we know these people are sensitized and trained and are interested in working with people with disabilities, then it's more likely to lead to a satisfying experience.
That brings up a good point as far as just the idea of what I think EASE is doing and what our service does is to try and help people minimize their risks and optimize the positives. And that might sound, you know, well, that sounds like a cliche, but that whole harm reduction. So for the very vulnerable person who can't even make a phone call because their voice is garbled and somebody's going to hang up on them, whether it be a partner or somebody that they're looking for paid services. How do you help somebody figure out how they can make that happen? Whether with a friend helping them out or something like that. And just the idea that it's peer run, that's what was most important to us. It's easy for people to say, do something as a healthcare professional, but it needs to come from the community. Say this is what we want, what we need to look at.
Right. One of the things I'd like to understand is how much work do you find is productive, needed with newly injured women, newly injured females? Because much of the discussion is talking about male sexuality. I'm wondering from the female side of it, what experience and perceptions you have about that.
It's definitely just as important, and just because there's two guys here as the speakers, I think you could generalize it. You know, you might have talked about your own physical function, but you can generalize it that they could be talking about women's experiences, that women have similar questions. They often don't, you know, women generally, there's less numbers than men, but they generally don't come to us as soon. And I can't say we could absolutely name why. Some is just a different, possibly just a different emotional connection to what an injury means. Guys have a physical thing that they can alter or fix, like as far as erection, that might say, well, I want this physical thing fixed first, so it might bring them in sooner and have the conversation sooner. The research we've done around women and asking women what's more important, more women in general, and this is, you know, small group of women we were asking, are looking at more group work and group education and group support than guys. But the similar issues come up with body image, with what's this going to mean in my life, what can I have sex, what's that's going to be like, what if I can't feel it, what should I tell my partner. I think that the earliest time I've ever been brought into answer someone's questions was in ICU. Someone's intubated and they're wondering what should I tell my partner, what's going to happen for me. And that's women and men within saying, I need an answer. You might not want all the details, but people really want to know that sexuality can be part of their lives in the future. And that's our mandate, to say the possibility that there is a way to move on. It might not make sense early on.
And asking the guys, like the Scarlet Road emphasizes a female sex worker and her amazing sensitivity. Is access to an escort service for women ever approached? Is it ever? You said something, Terry, about the counselor wanting to know about introducing, I gather, her disabled daughter to sex.
No, it wasn't a daughter, it was a son.
A son,
Yes.
okay. Okay, so all of this, from my view, seems to be geared toward not only the perception of a more immediate need and worry on the part of men, but also on the access to services for men. And is the counterpart for women explored?
Well, Dave and I made an effort to involve women peers. We do have one advisory board member who's female. But,
And I think it has, certainly we understand not just women, there's other ranges of sexual identity and things that we want to be as all-inclusive as possible. And I think that we have discussed it with some of the agency side of things. There are male escorts that work with the intimacy coaching, at least one. And how that, I guess, not to sort of deflect the question, but I think what's also really important for us is to hear these stories, because it helps us to sort of shape what we're doing. And I think, as we get involved in doing more training and orientation, how best we can do that and what those kind of needs are. Like, it'd be interesting to have that discussion about, I don't want to make any assumptions that that's what you're looking for, but if you were looking for something, what would actually be comfortable for you? What kind of, because part of the problem is, in having trialed these services last year, that it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to connect with that person that comes in the door. Sometimes there's just a feeling about it that you may not be as comfortable as you'd hoped. You may not find the person as attractive as you'd hoped. You may not be as sexually excited as you'd hoped. But sometimes those are issues that are really important to work through anyways, in relationships in general.
Yeah, in general.
As they kind of, ebb and flow sometimes over time. So, and I think that the discussions that we have, Terry and I found out things we had no idea about when we talked to former sex workers about what can be negotiated and what kind of conditions are likely to facilitate a positive experience from their side, in terms of cleanliness and, grooming and other, we may take that for granted, but sometimes we don't. We need to be reminded of, maybe in this circumstance, or working with a sex worker or an escort or an intimacy coach or a tantric masseuse, that there's certain things to keep in mind, and that it's a relationship. It's a very different kind of relationship. So I personally haven't had any discussions with women that have used a service like that. I'd be very interested in hearing about it.
In the movie Scarlet Road, one of the women does talk about the dispatcher in the service that is in Australia, New South Wales. She talks about her first sexual experience being with a male sex worker. But you bring up a really good point, Jean. The whole idea about the invisibility of women in disability, there's so many layers on where you can look at gender, women's voices, the experience of, and I'm thinking of the spine population is the bigger population, but just like the young virile guy is supposed to go on, fertility is something we put a lot of effort into. Even if women can still have kids after spinal cord injury and all sorts of disabilities. But just, how it's like a month-long conversation on whether it's how women are socialized, what our society says about women and sexuality, what it's okay to talk about. Sex workers there are many more female sex workers than male sex workers who see men and women, but we do know they exist. There's male sex workers that see men and women, and female sex workers that see men and women.
I'd be interested too in the kind of examining the underlying assumptions about women, whether they have.
Sorry, Jean, can I ask you to speak up just a little bit?
Oh, sure. Examining the underlying assumptions about women, whether an injury occurs in one's teenage years and the female hasn't had any sexual experience, or whether it's a spinal cord injury, or whether it's some other kind of illness that has impaired mobility or sensory experience. But I think that there are probably some basic assumptions that societal assumptions that need to be explored, specifically regarding women. Like, oh, well, maybe women will be satisfied with touching and cuddling.
Right. Stereotypes
those are things that I think need to be brought to the surface and examined.
So can we maybe take that question back to ease?
Absolutely, yeah. Now these are, big picture issues that were also on our table. I guess as things come up, and we recently have been focused on project-oriented things because of outcome sort of requests and things, presentations that we're asked to do and that sort of thing. But certainly that big, attitudinal addressing those issues around sexuality and more global understanding and inclusion and all that certainly underlies what we're doing as well.
A lot of people feel, do the disabled have a right to expect a sexual life? Like maybe that's something they should just give up. I think some people feel that.
It's definitely one of the myths out there.
Yeah.
And even just having ease begin and become something that is cohesive has let this conversation happen. That's worth it.
Yeah, I think seniors probably run into the same problems,
Absolutely.
especially in nursing homes and stuff.
That's a whole area right there.
Yeah.
And there's a segue for me, because we've developed some guidelines BC guidelines for supporting people who live in facilities around sexual health. And it's a document that is looks like this. Mm-hmm. It's a guideline to help facilities develop their own in helping support people who live in facilities, not just facilities like an extended care, but group homes.
Yeah.
And not just seniors, but anyone who receives care. Right. And how to negotiate that and how to help the staff that work with people who need care to be better informed, feel better supported on what's okay to help with, what they should help with, how to go about that. So there's lots of work being done, and this.
Can I just add a point about sometimes because we don't always get positive feedback for what we're doing, because some people perceive that on some level we think all people with disabilities need this. It's far from the truth. We recognize that lots of people with disabilities have healthy relationships and healthy sexual lives, but it's addressing that. Sometimes we just need to talk about things. Maybe that's all we need. We need to know it's okay to talk about it. Some people need some more hands-on experience or some guidance in figuring things out before they can find that relationship they're looking for or feel at peace with their sexuality on whatever level that is. Since we've been doing more media, certainly we've got more questions, and I was talking to an individual from the Kootenays recently who was telling me about his experience with his wife who was injured later in life and the kind of transition that they went through to find their sexual compatibility again and to because there was a lot of issues around
Careful
body
how much you
image.
say.
Yeah, but, yeah, no, just about, yeah, it was a lot of issues around body. I mean, all those things I continue to face. It's not like I'm free of all my body image issues, but they're less acute. They're less disruptive in a way, you know, and I think as we sort of let go of some of those layers, you know, that are protecting us, you know, so it's all that stuff too. Like I say, it's not just about, yeah, give me a phone number. Like, we have other things to address sometimes before we can make that call.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And even that, how do you get to that point? That's what people
Yeah.
want to know.
yeah,
What's that journey like, and what helped you, what helped everyone that is going through it to pass that on? It doesn't mean that you can live that for someone, but some
Is there a light at the end
inspiration.
of the tunnel, like
Yeah.
what's possible? I think a lot
Yeah.
of people would like to know that.
So I have a couple of questions. The first was one that was actually asked just a couple of minutes ago, but it's about a guide. You know, you showed this guide here, and for some other people online, it's titled "Supporting Sexual Health and Intimacy in Care Facilities: Guidelines for Supporting Adults Living in Long-Term Care Facilities and Group Homes in BC." Now, is this available online, or is this?
It is in the Public Health Agency of Canada, as well as Vancouver Coastal Health.
Okay.
It hasn't been officially adopted as a guideline here in Vancouver. It exists on its own.
I see.
It hasn't been actually put into practice, even though people are using it. But it's not on, like, Vancouver Coastal's books.
Okay.
It's on their website to use. And it
Like
looks
federal
at
book to use.
the important part of it is we looked at the clinical side, like what happens with the staff and people's lives. We also looked at ethics and the legal side of things, which is all important for the administration if they're going to be supporting staff and clients. Because we do know people, there's limits put on people's intimate lives. Even people holding hands in a facility are looked at differently and noted and paid attention to in ways that, you know, shouldn't happen in someone's home.
The other one was a question that was posed. You know, we're talking about guidelines and documents and things like that. Does anything exist that could provide information for sort of safe places for people to call? You know, let me just go back here a second. What was the question?
like have a stamp of approval, you mean?
Oh,
Kind of
not
a-
so much. Just give me 1 second here. Okay.
He's
Can there be a
approved.
list of trusted places for someone to have? I'm presuming a trusted list of locations, you know, sexual
Services.
salons or services, exactly. Now,
Well, that's the kind of service that Touching Base and TLC provide. And that's
can you explain
kind
about them?
Touching Base and TLC, they're very similar to EASE. In fact, we've taken a lot of our ideas from them, and they screen sex workers and provide referrals. That's the Australian group,
Touching Base.
Touching Base.
And TLC is in the UK.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the UK group does that, just because of the legalities of
Not sure.
pandering.
So right now, nothing exists for
Locally?
BC, Canada.
No, not that we're aware of. I mean, I think,
Is that something that EASE would be tackling later on, or?
we've talked about that idea. I mean, what that would look like is a little unclear, but some of the groups we're working with now, I think that we could, I mean, I don't know, there'd be a list that, you know, has some stamp of approval from us other than recognition that they've been through a training program, and that, I don't know,
Possibly.
possibly that, or, you know, whether we give some certificate of completion or something like that.
Or just
But
simply
I
by a
think-
mention, say, on a website, you know, would give people a comfort factor, knowing that because it's listed there, not necessarily having a stamp or approval, but just have that listing, it would make them feel more comfortable, right?
It's definitely, like you say, Dave, something that has been talked about by EASE. And that's a possibility that it's a known group. It's not something that we could say you can go there and things will be positive. The idea of you can't guarantee anyone's experience, for one thing, and you can't you can't promote a certain, like as far as legally, maybe I'm wrong there, but the idea is testimonials might be more helpful, that peers can say, hey, I've gone here, this was my experience. That's a very grassroots, general, this is what happened to me. Makes more sense, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, and say an ease says yes, because staff changes, all sorts of things change. People's unique experiences in the moment are going to be different.
I think that at least you could have something that says somebody has been through a training program of some kind. And you know that as best as we can, we would know that if it's a particular agency, that their motivation and their philosophy fits with ours, and fits with what we're trying to achieve. But like Marie said, there's no way you can possibly guarantee an individual experience. But at least I think you can more or less guarantee, maybe a bit strong word, but it's kind of like guaranteeing access. Like I could get in the door. What really happens when I'm there is a little, but it's that kind of thing. I know this person is comfortable working with someone with an amputation or a spinal cord injury or cerebral palsy or whatever that is. But am I going into that experience with the sensitivity and understanding about what that relationship's about and how to negotiate what I'm looking for? Because that in and of itself isn't really enough to, like I said, it's just sort of like an access question, isn't it?
So how long have you been working at this? We talked about ease and the process and things that have happened, but let's look at a timeline. When did you start?
Well, I think the conversation of 2003 or 2002, so probably about 10 years with probably
since you talked to Sam Sullivan?
About a 7-year gap in between, and then we started up probably about 2.5 or 3 years ago or so.
So when you guys started talking about, had you looked at other countries and what they were doing, or was this something that you guys just thought, hey, it's a need?
No, well, that part of the research in 2003 did involve, and there had been stories on shows like 60 Minutes. I always remember this image of this picnic they had. I think it was in the Netherlands, and they used to throw these Sunday picnics. They'd have these sex workers, male and female, that would go to these, and it was sort of clothing optional kind of thing, and a lot of frolicking in the sunshine and people, hugging and kissing, and not necessarily engaging in intercourse or anything. I don't remember that part of it, but it just seemed that it was like a field trip for, there was an allowance to use some of your funding even in those days. This was probably over 20 years ago, that it was allowed that if you received government funding, like individualized funding, you could use a portion of that. Sexual services were included in that basket of things that you could use that money for, to a certain amount per month. And that always stuck with me as a pretty incredible thing to do. And it may be an angle that we're looking at down the road, that it could be seen as a legitimate by the government. I mean, we all know it's a legitimate health issue and an important issue in people's lives. Whether we could find a way to support financially some aspect to some experience as part of a therapeutic process, however that would be defined, that would be pretty groundbreaking.
There's a comment there. Holland paid for 1 visit per month if you were on services. So.
Yeah, and there have been places over the years where there's been funding and then it's been taken away just like anywhere. But our research around the Israel connection dates back to 10 years ago, because these questions have been coming up. Say, what are you doing? How come you aren't doing anything? Where we're having trouble getting people to be able to hold hands in a facility. Surrogacy and is a far stretch, but being able to say in other parts of the world that this exists and that sexuality and intimacy is a quality of life issue that affects people's will to go on. If you're thinking of in the core of rehab, that optimizing your life. Canada at least said in most parts of the world that sexuality is part of all of your life, and we don't, like you say, we don't pay attention to it. That invisibility, no matter, our service has been around for 37 years, and it's still, we've moved leaps
Wow.
and bounds, but there's still much silence.
That was pretty much the day I was injured.
Yeah.
And I went to Shaughnessy Spinal Cord Unit, and George Zaz was finding his way,
Yeah.
trying to develop a program, and
And he's the founder.
he's
of
the
our-
founder, yeah. And
Dr. George Saz of
Sexual
Sexual
Health.
Health Rehab
Yeah.
Service. He's still around.
so we used
Retired,
to
but
go,
groundbreaking. Yeah.
yeah, we used to go have these conversations with medical students at UBC and talk about disability and sex, and in the mid. I think when I came back, and I moved back to Ontario for a while, but when I came back in '84, I think we were still doing those. And yeah, that was really groundbreaking to just have open, very explicit conversations about what sex and disability look like for me or other people on the panel.
So there are a few of you, sitting around a table one day talking about, we need to get something going here to make it a bit easier for not only ourselves but for other people to access services and important services that are trusted and those sort of things. And then there was a little bit of a gap, and then a number of years ago it sort of started up
Yeah,
again, right?
3 years
3
ago or
years
so.
ago.
Well, and really, like Terry said, the conversation, a question was posed kind of innocently, and we ended up having lunch with this woman, and
Who was
there
working at the Compassion
at
Club.
the Compassion
Yeah.
Club, and there was obviously a pretty intense interest. And then when we invited people from Pivot,
Pivot
well, I
Legal?
don't think we had any idea the amount of interest that would, the support it just suddenly started happening. It's like at that point we didn't really have to do much other than be there and continue the conversation.
So I'm curious
But-
why the Compassion Club, a number of months ago, we had Riel do a session here,
Yeah.
and
You guys there?
Can you explain
Terry
what
was.
Compassion Club is?
thank you, I was just getting to that. So can you
Yeah.
explain what the Compassion Club is and how they got involved in with this?
Well, the BC Compassion Club, they sell medicinal marijuana, make medicinal marijuana available. And of course, that's a gray area as well. It's illegal, but the law tolerates it. So it seemed like a natural fit involving the Compassion Club people because they know gray areas, and this is a gray area of the law. And so yeah, but I think the most eye-opening part was having the sex trade workers around the table. That was something that, yeah, that brought up things like girlfriend experience and ideas.
Boyfriend
and,
experience.
Yeah, boyfriend experience and things that I'd never thought.
Like a more holistic look at what a sex worker experience could be, that it's more
Yeah.
than just sex, that it's about the intimacy, the communication, those layers.
I mean, usually the basic rule is no exchange of bodily fluids. So you're not going to be kissing. You're not going to have oral sex. You're going to be using condoms. You're going to be using oral dams and all that kind of stuff, which doesn't exactly seem appealing to a lot of people. Is that a real experience, per se? But, well, it turns out that's not necessarily true. But in some sort, what they call the girlfriend and boyfriend experience means that there can be cuddling and kissing and oral sex, and intercourse isn't necessarily part of that. That's if that's going to happen, it may be probably a separate negotiation. And it doesn't mean that if somebody says they're open to the girlfriend or boyfriend experience that it's going to happen either, because it does depend when you meet somebody if oral hygiene isn't what you'd expect, or general hygiene. There's circumstances that may prevent it. But it is something that is possible that I didn't really know about. Even though I had that experience during my research, I didn't know it. Just kind of in this one or two circumstances, actually, it happened quite without a negotiation. It was just I always said what I was doing there, that I was doing research, and I was looking for an experience, but I'm also trying to find out what this is like for people with disabilities. In some cases, I guess I was okay, and things just happened the way I wanted them to. But I think it's that sort of basic level of information and education that people, if they are going to use this kind of service, how to address those, how to negotiate those things.
Can I make a comment to add to what you asked about the Compassion Club? What Terry was saying, that it began with the medicinal marijuana and that legal aspect, but the person that you met is somebody who did massage work there, so that it's kind of that inclusion on what does the Compassion Club mean. They're looking at medical marijuana for people who have certain needs around chronic pain, around disabilities of all sorts, and marijuana is not the only treatment. There's counseling, like talk counseling, there's body work, like non-sexual body work, but body work, and just that inclusion I see E's trying to emulate, that there's many layers to someone's life.
Yeah, it's called the Wellness Center, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a sort of side-by-side service. That,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's not just, here, go up to the desk and make your order and go home. It's like...
Unless you want to.
Unless you want to, yeah.
Yeah, no,
There's
it's
no
member.
drive-through.
It's
Yeah.
member, you have to be member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
part of the proceeds, part of the profits go to the Wellness Center.
And where is that?
It's on Commercial and 13. Commercial Drive.
Yeah.
Is there a process in becoming a member?
Yes, you need a doctor's certificate or a doctor to sign. Just your general practitioner signs.
Can you go to the Wellness Center without going to the Compassion Club?
No, you have to be a member.
But you can get the form online too. I'm pretty sure you can download it, and it's pretty straightforward. Most doctors are more supportive. The last 10 years ago, it was really hard to find a doctor that would sign off on it. But I actually had a doctor from GF Strong sign off on it, and at the time, the policy was that it would be supported, but somehow magically it did happen. So I'm not saying that that's the general policy there now, but certainly indicates that there's a more understanding about the benefits of using medical marijuana.
So another question I have is that why don't you just share a little bit about ease? We talked about it, but exactly what do you guys want to do? What do you want to accomplish? What's your goal? What was your goal when you first started? Has it changed?
It's a good question. It certainly has evolved. I think this range of supports, like we're talking about the Compassion Club model, I think we have in mind initially, like bridging this gap of providing a direct service that people can access. But what are the implications around providing that kind of service? And it means like it's not sending somebody, having a list of agencies, here you go, our job's done. It's continuing education, continuing discussion and peer groups and mentoring and connecting with different agencies and doing training and orientation and presenting at conferences and workshops. And I think that we can't do that without doing the other. We have this whole, what we're trying to figure out now is the things are really happening is how we can best structure ourselves to accomplish the things we want to do and make these kind of partnerships with different organizations and have our website up and running and managing a blog and,
Get that conversation going.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying, Gene?
So I don't know that it's just, we probably were less aware that all those other things were necessary. Oops.
What would you say, Dave, that kind of at the core of it is to be support for vulnerable peers who are looking for assistance in any type of intimacy?
Yeah,
access?
I think, although that initial story about the young boy that was injured in a hockey accident isn't about a boy, that it's just an example of the kinds of experiences we're talking about. Certainly we have people that are connections with us through the peer network, and so that have never, later in life, have never had any intimate connections of a sexual nature or just close physical contact in a meaningful way with somebody other than personal care. and at that stage in life we're starting to look. So I mean, it is just such a wide range of experiences and needs.
We should put up, sorry to interrupt you, we should
Yeah.
put up Corey Silverberg and Fran Odette's contact up there too. They did the Sexuality and Access Project in Ontario.
What's not up there right now?
Is it?
I know I have Oxford Film, CBC, Global News.
No.
No, I didn't.
It's
Who was it?
Corey Silverberg, who does a lot of work in education around sex and disability, and Fran Odette, who does the same work and works with women with disabilities and anti-violence in Toronto. And they did a research project called Sexuality and Access, and they interviewed 400 people in Ontario who were people who accessed care, like just general care aid work to help for activities of daily living, and care workers themselves around sexuality and how or if or when is it brought up in that care relationship. And they asked us to help them recruiting, and before we could even get back to them, they had 400 responses. And it was a research project, and out of that they have a workshop. They have a peer-run workshop, and really interesting information around that relationship between the caregivers, whether they be paid, unpaid, bartered, like family or friends or an agency, and how much we don't talk about that need of what does sexuality mean and how do you negotiate assistance. So it's groundbreaking and worth a look.
That's a line that most people think should never be crossed, but others of us have a
I was just going to ask
different
that.
opinion.
Right, yeah, because we're now venturing into a whole new gray area, right?
Yeah.
So, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to minimize that gray area, I guess, by talking about some of those things in that research project also.
And talking about not to, because from what your response is, that could be, what I said could be taken all sorts of ways as far as that relationship. Doesn't necessarily, I wasn't meaning a sexual relationship.
No.
But that could be
It
heard that
happens.
way. It happens, and not everyone knows from either side what their rights are. What we understand as far as just like the logistics of what is legal and in standards of care with care workers, nurses, OTs, physios, that you can help set someone up to be sexual and help them clean up afterwards, but you can't be there at the time. That's the legal aspect. Yes, people cross all sorts of lines in their professional work, but that you can actually be there and participate.
Right. So why don't we talk a little bit about the legal aspect, because you mentioned pivot, right? So share a little bit about that. We all understand that there are many legal aspects behind it, but what's at the core?
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm always a little uncomfortable. I don't feel that I'm certainly the
Just
expert
around some of
in
the
that
conversations
issue.
you've had, though.
But I think the whole issue of, what we can actually do as peers, I think, is share information safely. I don't think we're at any risk. This whole issue of procurement, if I am somehow a middleman, if you like, in helping somebody connect to somebody that provides those services.
Or made the call.
As just a private citizen, I don't know that there's a problem in that. Is there as an agency? I don't know if there's gray areas around that too, and I think further consultation on those sorts of issues we need to have. But I think we understand that there's some degree in some cases that some of that assistance is required for, say, that somebody can't make that call or can't connect with somebody, doesn't have the physical voice to do that.
In that case, though, you're thinking of that person would need to direct somebody to do that.
Right.
And if it could be a family or friend, it makes it less complicated than a care worker. But it's the same, I would see it as the same as another part of your care that you're directing your care. It's still a gray area.
Yeah. So if I say were to ask my attendant to call an agency for me and to arrange to have somebody come over at 7 o'clock tonight, that's a gray area.
Yeah, everything in theory, should be done to help you do it yourself or get somebody besides the worker to do that, because you can't guarantee that gray area wouldn't be challenged, even though it's highly unlikely legally.
Very highly unlikely, yeah.
But not certain.
But we would like it to be certain.
Yeah.
I think that's, if we could get to that point, that we know very clearly what we can't, it's kind of like the Compassion Club. I don't think there's any worry that people walking out of the Compassion Club are going to get arrested. But it could happen.
Yeah.
We know it could happen.
Yep.
And legally right now, if you or anyone else made that call for someone else, you are procuring. That's what we were able to clear up in our guidelines, that it's that procurement, even though, like, for myself as not a legal person by any means, that part is clear, but the actual sex isn't illegal. So sex between two consenting adults, that procurement part is illegal, the sex isn't. So if you come upon somebody in your group home, that doesn't mean aren't other logistical concerns or questions. It's not an illegal activity.
That's interesting. When did you start, taking on that bit of a consulting role for EASE?
Well, my understanding is our service has been consulted off and on over the years.
From the beginning, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's as a consult basis, and that when you became more active, you called us up again, just like you were connecting with other services.
So who else is involved? You mentioned Pivot, GF, Compassion Club.
Yeah, and then there's PACE, the Providing Alternatives in Counseling and Education.
And who are they?
For sex workers?
For sex
Yeah,
workers.
sex workers.
Now, one of their members, who's also a former sex worker, is on our committee. And we've had other people, like through the Compassion Club, that were there in the beginning, aren't active members now, but are, at least in one case, available for consultation when we need them. And then people from the community. So Terry and myself and another woman with a disability. There's been another gentleman that's been involved with a different disability from time to time. I feel like I'm missing somebody.
Essential Solutions rep.
Yeah, so the 2 escort-type services are involved.
And
Yeah.
what are they involved because there's an interest for those services to create a bit of a niche market for themselves? Or is it?
In one case, I would say yes. That's somebody that is sort of worked as a booking agent, after a career and a whole other, and she was getting a lot of questions from people with disabilities or requests for these types of services, and did recognize that there was something that could be a specialized kind of service for people with disabilities.
And had compassion for the fact it wasn't offered, would you say?
Yeah. And I think in the other case, it's not that there isn't a recognition of that there. It's partly what we're doing just for, I guess, sex workers in general is seen as, our mandate of harm reduction, of that side of it as well, is certainly very important to sex work in general.
Right.
So if we can help each other sort of work through this and improve that situation. But the other woman who runs an agency is also, she has her own screening tool. Like, generally, if you make a call, it's not just about, I'll take number 32 at 8 o'clock. It's kind of like, well, we go through, what are you looking for? What's your background? Is there a disability? Is there, so as best as they can, they know who best to connect you with, and what your needs are, and if there's anything specialized involved.
So it almost looks like a list is being developed. We're talking, you've mentioned a few different people and organizations. It's almost like something does exist out there. It's word of mouth also. It's not formalized.
Yeah.
Like that testimonial type,
but
even
it's going
if
back
it's,
to that idea, you mentioned earlier also, Dave, of, peers sharing information.
Yeah, that's huge.
So,
and we're hoping to do a pilot training program in April, but it's kind of on hold.
sort of thing.
That's on hold for the moment because this other issue came up, which you may want to talk about, an event that we're having.
Sure.
It's kind of got in the way of that for now, but only
I'm
for...
gonna call it getting away. It's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Well, no, it's a very good thing, and we all see it as a very, it's a priority. It's something if we can make happen, we definitely want it to make happen,
Okay.
because raising awareness is very important.
Absolutely.
So,
Before we go on to that, one of the aspects you're talking about is like, what's the goal?
Yes.
We
thank you.
see, to think about what they're able to do in Australia and New South Wales, where it's decriminalized, is that group Touch and Base that you talked about, Terry, has actually the people that live with disability and sex workers as two discriminated against minorities have come together to say we can be more powerful together in society, and joining forces to try and change attitudes, try and change the rules, trying to have more openness around sexuality and support for disability.
Thank you. That's good information. I just like the whole idea of so many people getting on board and trying to help out with this, because it's only been a number of years really that it's going to come back. I mean, the idea has been going on forever. It's not new.
Yeah.
It's been going on in other parts of the world. I mentioned Israel has been pioneering this service, and actually within the rehab centers. And Australia's legalized it, and services in most European countries are quite a bit different than North America. And so we're a little bit behind on some of those, but it takes people like yourselves to bring it up front and center, push that awareness up there, and really get people talking about it. Once we get talking about it, then people start thinking, hey, what do we need to do to change? So part of my other question is, well, what about policy changes and those sort of things? I mean, I think you guys are talking about working on the grassroots level with services, but what about the other end of it? What about the legal and the policy side of it?
like legislative, or you mean organizational policy and
more legislative, more aside from the legality, the governmental aspects of it, that sort of thing, because I think it's pretty important, because some of the other services that are provided in other countries is because it's legal, right? And I think that's huge. It would have a big impact.
It's an aspect of it, it's like physio is legal and acupuncture is legal.
Yes. So is that something that EASE, is thinking about also, is looking in that direction?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, anything that would legalize or at least decriminalize what we're trying to do, which may mean policy, it may mean legislation, it may mean, for a time being, a compassion club kind of approach to it, but it may mean special licensing, special training programs, credentials for people to engage as a professional kind of credential, in this kind of work. And people do have, like there's sexologists that do body work. They just don't do that degree of, they don't do sort of hands-on. I mean, there's tantric workers, which I don't know if there's a credential that really goes with tantric work. There probably is different forms of body work.
Not a professional association credential,
but
there are credentials that people can get.
But it in a way, it's kind of like you talk about this list, not to avoid the policy question, but even that way, you could say, go see a tantric worker. Well, what does that mean? So I've seen a tantric worker. I could recommend that particular person. I don't know that every tantric worker is going to provide the same.
What is a tantric worker?
Well, I think my general experience of it is it's a much more holistic approach to body. It's sort of an integration of body work, spirituality, and sexuality without a particular outcome. It's total body massage in this case. It's sort of a combination of meditation, energy work, and body work. And so not
with the erotic being possible.
With the erotic being possible, but I think it's often sort of seen as a way to not focus on your genitals.
Yeah.
To not think that eventually this is going to lead to me having an orgasm or ejaculating or having some experience that I always expect from, and to just, because I certainly personally found that very useful in allowing other parts of my body to be sensual and sexual. You know, and we talk about, I don't know how many people have seen the film The Untouchables, and the quadriplegic man. Well, there's a scene. It's a quadriplegic man that hires this individual to be his caregiver, but they have this. It's a French film. It's a very interesting dynamic, and he talks about his ears are his focal point in his sex life, and how much pleasure he's, and George Zaz and I used to call them eargasms, and that was but it could be anything, and they actually, once you allow yourself, for that to happen, that is a legitimate sexual experience, whether it's an eargasm or a headgasm or a back of the neckgasm or wherever it is, that's kind of went off track. What was I trying?
But that's a lot of people don't give themselves permission to, or even know that that's possible.
Yeah.
We were talking about tantric.
Yeah, so that can help to sort of focus your attention in different, like really appreciate total. I mean, even if you don't have sensation and someone is massaging your feet, there are still subtle changes that occur that you can notice, that you can pay attention to.
But the idea of tantric is what we talk about and teach in sexuality, as far as body remapping, to try and get in touch with the parts of your body you can feel, to get in touch with the parts of your body that you can't feel, but you get that sense of when it's touched or it's visualized.
Yeah.
And I see a place for that idea of tantric touch for people that are interested in the future, to be more incorporated. Like, I think in acupuncture, in the time I've been in rehab, they weren't allowed, acupuncturists weren't allowed in the rehab facility. Massage therapists weren't even. And things have, I know they're different than something that is erotic, but I can see that we talk about that mind-body connection, but it's so different from how many people in the world were brought up to learn about their sexuality. And they might not even know that that's possible any more than they know anything else is possible after an injury. We teach all sorts of possibilities, and
I think that's
you can take them or not.
And that a lot of those things are legal, and they can be just as useful as a sex worker, depending on where a person's at. And that we want to try to make sure we're providing resources and information on that whole range of things.
So I think what we'll do is we'll stop there for now, and then I think what we can focus on in the next session is that, where you're at now and moving into the future, what your goals, what your vision, and also incorporating what I'd like to hear from GF.